Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and we are the Astrology Star Sisters. And joining me today is Joy Vernon and Madam Simon. Hi, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Liz, for having us back. Always so fun.
We're talking about astrology and tarot for Sagittarius season. Joy is an astrologer, tarot reader, and Reiki master, and her website is joyvernon.com. Madam Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist. And Simon's website is iconalchemy.com. And I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett. I'm an astrologer, author, and intuitive. And my website is alightpath.com. And we're all consulting astrologers. Here we have the artwork from Madam Simon for the Sagittarius season. So do you want to tell us about it?
So this is actually based on Mercury's retrograde, because it defines so much of the beginning part of the Sagittarius season. And we've got a great blue heron on it. The heron represents the Egyptian god Bennu, who, has some associations with the sun, but also with kind of a messenger, right? Which of course Mercury is. And I consider herons to be luck. I was always raised to believe that they were luck to see. The masks are based on Venetian masks. And if you look in the eye of one of them, it has a sigil that directs us to examine truth. And we've got the fire and water for Sagittarius season, but also Mercury having retrograded back into Scorpio, and so many things going on with Scorpio and with water signs during at least the first part of this Sagittarius season.
Lovely. So is this art for sale?
Yes, it is. All of my art is available for sale in my Etsy shop. And it can be found under Icon Alchemy.
Thank you. Joy, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, the Bennu bird, I believe, is the bird that's shown in the star card.
Oh, okay. Cool. I love it.
In the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. That's the way I learned it, at least. So
that is awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful piece of art. Thanks for sharing, Madam Simon.
Yeah, I love it. Gorgeous. Gorgeous.
Thank you.
So we're in the season of Sagittarius. It's a mutable modality. Joy, do you want to lead us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the mutable modality, it tends to complete things, tie up the loose ends, but it's also evolving and shifting things into the next cycle. It tends to be mediating, adapting, distributing energies, so to speak, accommodating. It can be restless. Its ruling planet is Jupiter. And it's the fire element: energy, desire, passion, excitement, adventure, competition, motivation. Now its mantra, now I have to confess that I don't actually work a lot with these mantras, so I always have to look them up. And I found 3 different ones. So I'm like, well, of course it's Jupiter ruled. It's going to have it's going to have more. And even of these, I think I saw both I understand and I see, which I'm like, well, those are synonyms, but we had I seek, I aspire, I understand. I personally kind of liked I aspire for Sagittarius. I think that's a good one, but all of them make pretty good sense to me. Do you guys have any experience? Like, I don't know. It just never came across my plate, so to speak, early on. And then when I did finally start learning about the mantras, I was kind of like, that's interesting, and didn't really go anywhere. Do you guys have a favorite mantra? What did you guys learn for Sagittarius?
Well, I learned the mantras from Demetra George probably in the early 90s. And, there was just basically her doing them. And now I see more and more people. So I really love how they're growing and expanding.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've always rather detested them.
I think I see their value, and I don't like to be pinned down. So I'm gonna equivocate on this one. So our keywords are philosophical, adventurous, high-minded, far-seeing, spontaneous, idealistic, jovial, of course, motivational, and spontaneous. And our caution with Sagittarius can be arrogant or unreliable, maybe quick-tempered or inconsistent, which matches up pretty nicely with that mutable modality. So we filled that out pretty well. But do you guys have anything else that you want to add that didn't get covered yet?
I don't, but Simon, do you?
Under the cautions, well, and it actually kind of goes with interestingly enough, with the keywords. One of the keywords, funny, we've got spontaneous twice here.
Oh, do we?
That's awesome. Very, very Sagittarius. But one of the things that I see typically with Sagittarius is there is two sides of the same coin, which is idealism on one hand and fanaticism on the other.
Yeah. One of my favorite Sagittarius stories, I got to share this if I can do it quickly. I was at it was a holiday party for my tarot meetup way back in like 2007 probably. And there were two Sagittariuses, and they were sitting with a couple people in between them. So they were kind of like at either end of the table. And they just started going. And once they started going, the Sagittarian arrows were just literally flying over our heads. And one of them worked in the library in Denver. So I kind of like, at first I was like really interested in what they were saying. And then they got so abstract. I was just like, I can't even follow this anymore. And I started thinking about the one guy, and I was like, he had told me to come visit him at the library, but the elevator doesn't go to the floor he works on. And so all of a sudden, out of the blue, I'm like, does the elevator go to the 5th floor? And I didn't. And the way I blurted that out when they were just like all of these arrows up above everybody's head, I was like, oh, that has a different sound. Just like Sagittarius to me is always like on the 5th floor, and I don't know how to get there.
I love it.
Great story. I love it. Thanks for sharing, Joy. Okay, so the sun's ingress into Sagittarius is today, November 21st at 5:36 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'll let Joy lead us through this. And I want to thank Joy for doing most of the work on the slides. I really appreciate it.
Oh, 100%. It's easy to do. Don't mind it at all. So we've got, and I had, at one point, I was like, well, I don't want to just do ingress charts, but then the ingress charts started looking more and more interesting. I'm like, this will keep us busy. This is good. So we did talk about that grand trine and water last month. And I think Simon is going to bring out some more nuances than that even, but it's still ongoing. Mars, which had been my focus last time, has moved on, but Mercury retrograde and Lilith are both holding the spot there. The sun in Sagittarius adds a second bisextile to what we looked at last month. We have that ongoing bisextile with the 3 outer planets. But the sun at 0 Sag adds a because it's sextile to Pluto, so it adds a second bisextile in there. So we'll and that ends up forming a trapezoid figure, which is called a cradle or a trapeze. So the 3 sextiles plus the bordered by the opposition form this thing called a trapeze configuration. So we'll get to explore that which is a less common configuration. So both of these are active for most of Sag season due to the fact that we've got a number of planets hitting that end of Scorpio position. So we've got Mercury retrograde right now. Then when it goes direct, it'll cross that spot again. Venus is going to move past that. And then Lilith is right there anyway, but she's going to move kind of back and forth through that. And then the moon will hit it towards maybe 3 weeks from now or so. I can't remember quite when. But these things, they're not just like a snapshot of today. They're actually really ongoing for about 3 weeks.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, or Madam Simon, or do you want to just go on to the next slides? Because these are all broken down in different slides.
Yeah, let's go on to the next slides and we can get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
So we have the tarot cards for Sagittarius, and I'll let Joy start.
So our Sagittarius card is Temperance, which in the Thoth deck is art. And the first decan of that is going to be the Eight of Wands. And so we've got, in the decan ruler for the Eight of Wands is Mercury, which of course is our retrograde that we're talking about. And it got, I think it got all the way, and you'll have to correct me, Simon, but I think it got all the way into the second decan before it retrograded, or was it into just the first decan of Sag before it retrograded?
As I recall, it
Just
might have made it all the way to 11. I'm not certain, but
okay.
Yeah, but it was primarily within the first decan.
Okay, so it retrograded in its own decan then. So that's actually kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. But yeah, it's a Mercury ruled decan and represents speed and forward movement. A lot of times I think of that as either kind of flying into a landing or else blasting off into space, depending on the illustration on the card. And so when Mercury's retrograding in that decan, that kind of gives us a little bit more to work with, perhaps.
So, Madam Simon, do you want to share anything about the Thoth deck, about the cards related to this?
Well, the key word on that Eight of Wands there is swiftness, which is quite appropriate to what Joy was just talking about. Also, if we're looking at the major arcana card for that, art for the Thoth deck, what is portrayed in the image is an alchemical process. We see the eagle, which is a symbol for Scorpio, and the lion, which is a symbol for Leo, but their colors are switched. So the fiery creature is wearing the watery colors, and vice versa. So I find that very interesting and, of course, applicable to our current water fire situation. But also, this card is very much about an alchemical process, specifically about getting two things that seem to be oppositional to get along well. We should note that Mercury is considered to be in fall in Sagittarius, or it was not in fall, in detriment, okay, in Sagittarius, because it's opposite its own sign, okay? And so Mercury is trying to do Mercury things, but on a much bigger playing field than it's used to, because it's ruled by Jupiter, okay? And so, this can be a time of dealing with paradoxes, okay, of trying to integrate things that you don't normally think are going to work well together. But note that keyword of art, that name of art, okay? Art contrary to popular opinion, it's not simply a matter of, oh, I'm going to make something pretty. Okay. Art is a process of creative problem solving. Okay. And so that that idea of creative problem solving is something that I want us to carry forward through this season. That that when there are challenges, it's not a matter of like, oh, darn, I've got this awful challenge. It's instead, oh, this is an opportunity to do something cool that I might not have otherwise thought how to do, right? That instead I'm being presented this challenge that encourages me to bring forth both my innate talents and my ability to look at things from a different perspective. Jupiter is philosophical, Sagittarius idealistic. Both are associated with travel and with exposing ourselves to new ideas. Well, now here we can try to make use of those new ideas to come up with a more integrated approach to something than we could have done initially on our own.
Joy, do you want to share anything more about the Rider-Waite-Smith, or we're ready to move on?
No, I want to keep going. So I want to piggyback on what Simon was saying, because I think that recognition of the connotation of the word art is really important, because it also is symbolic or represents things that are made or created as opposed to things that are naturally occurring. And and even the kind of so-called little prayer that you do with tarot, if you want to go that way, talks about the cards of art, which are cards that have been created. And so there's a lot of and that kind of ties even the alchemy of that card into the into this kind of magical thing of what are we creating? How are we taking what is natural and evolving it into something that is better and improved? That how are we taking something natural and creating something better out of it? And that's usually in reference to ourselves. But of course, it can be much broader than that as well. And I think temperance is another, is especially in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, as opposed to the Thoth tradition, does make a little bit more sense of the Sagittarian energy in that card, and the Rider-Waite-Smith does not. But it is important when you look at it from a Kabbalistic point of view, and I don't want to go into the details because I need illustrations and guides and like to point at things and all of that to explain it all. But Sagittarius goes from the lowest of the triangles, and there's the bottom circle on the tree of life, and then there's a lower triangle, and then there's a middle triangle and an upper triangle. And so it goes from that lower triangle and crosses what's called the veil to get to the middle triangle. Let's just put it that way. That's super simplistic in terms of trying to explain it, but it is crossing a border, which Sagittarius represents travel and foreign places and things like that. And so the fact that the path on the tree of life that Sagittarius represents, this is why I'm like, and I would normally have my diagram and stuff. It is crossing a border. It's crossing a boundary. That's called the veil. And so that does make a lot more sense of why temperance gains that association and is a good representation for that association with Sagittarius.
You did a good job explaining that. I understood perfectly. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank goodness.
Anything else you want to add, Simon?
Let's move forward.
So we have the chart here with the grand trine in water, and I'll let you take it over, Joy.
Yeah, and so we've got Jupiter is retrograde right there at 2458, so just shy of 25 degrees of Cancer. And then we get our Mercury and Lilith, and there are different ways of calculating Lilith. And so Simon's going to go into that because she understands it better than me. And so, but she is right there around 25, 26 degrees. And Mercury retrograde is right there at 26. And then, and Saturn also retrograde. So all three, actually including Lilith, everything that's in our grand trine is retrograde right now. Saturn's at 25. I think it's going to keep going back until it hits 24, maybe, before it turns direct. And so that's what we're working with. And I think, and we did talk about this last time, but Mars was there, giving a lot more energy to this with a retrograde Mercury in there right now. This emotional kind of whirlpool energy is a retrospective energy, and that's going to shift throughout the month. It was a instigating energy when Mars was there. Now it's retrospective with a retrograde Mercury. We're going to push forward with a little more clarity once Mercury goes direct. Then Venus will come in and she'll add her sense of, okay, now that we've thought about this, how can we really open the heart of this beautiful grand trine in water? And then later the moon will actually go through there. So we really get to explore this on an energetic level, a mental level, and an emotional level. So I think this is and water trines are going to be fairly emotional to start with, but I think we really get some interesting opportunities with working with this energy.
Simon?
So, first, a note about the Liliths. There are multiple ways of calculating Lilith. I actually currently use what is known as the interpolated or natural Lilith, which is a mode of calculating it developed by Dieter Koch, who is the person who developed the Swiss ephemeris that most astrology software uses. The mean position is simply an average of positions. The so-called true or osculating Lilith, it's based upon some assumptions about the moon's movement that don't really take into good consideration the sun's influence on the moon. Anyway, it's very nerdy stuff, but but typically when the moon is close to that point, and it is this empty point in space, it's not a planet or anything, right? But when the moon is close to that point, then all three Liliths kind of converge. Okay. So this Lilith, whether you're calculating by mean or interpolated, this Lilith has been within this grand water trine for a while now. Lilith has effectively been the placeholder that the planets are entering into that empty space. And one of the things about Lilith is that there can be this kind of deep longing where Lilith is. She relates to our authentic selves that are not necessarily prettied up for public consumption. Right? not very socially acceptable at times, the things that we tend to hide away, but that are nonetheless very truly part of ourselves. And so Lilith is very good for doing shadow work. Okay. And she's definitely about accepting the whole of who we are, regardless of whether or not that has some rough spots. So Lilith has actually been, she was in this grand water trine back toward the beginning of September, at the time of the lunar eclipse, back when it was the lunar eclipse and North Node and Jupiter then in Cancer, a little further back in Cancer, all trine to each other. Okay. And remember I said that Lilith has that longing sense, right? She's an empty spot in the sky that nonetheless has this kind of gravitational power. Okay. It's, I guess, the best way for me to put it. And so her starting out this grand trine that all these other planets have since been moving into, they're moving in to try to fill this empty space, right? They're bringing these topics to this space that we may have difficulty sometimes defining for ourselves, you know? If we're not used to engaging with those parts of ourselves, then we may be like, what is this longing? Where did this come from? Right? I don't quite know how to deal with it or express it. And now each of these traditional planets that moving through there is then giving us hints for how to express that longing that we may not have previously acknowledged. So that's some fabulous Lilith stuff going on there. Also, it should be noted, the recent new moon in Scorpio was on Lilith and conjoining the Mercury Cazimi the very next day, a few hours later, literally a few hours later. And with all of that happening at that point, then that in turn has an effect on Jupiter, right? And that in turn affects our Sagittarius season. That Jupiter is still like, oh boy, we had all these intense things happening, including, of course, the moon, which rules Cancer, where Jupiter is. Okay. So when the moon comes back around, in a little over 3 weeks' time, or a little under a month, however you choose to look at it, we're going to get effectively a revisiting of the themes of that new moon, right before the next new moon that will be in Sagittarius. So,
anything else you'd like to add, Joy?
No, that's I'm just, one of my things is that this is hitting my chart really closely, and so sometimes it's harder to step back and get that perspective of that. And so I'm just like, really, that's very interesting. I guess I really think I don't have anything else. I really appreciate that interpretation, Simon, and I'm gonna bow out.
Okay.
Oh, good, we've got tarot cards to talk about.
Go ahead, Joy.
Okay, so our grand water trine, and we did talk about this last month, and so we used the decanic cards, the minor arcana cards. So I figured we'd shift over to the major arcana this time. And so for Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer, we have Death, the Moon, and the Chariot. And the grand trine is associated with the planet Jupiter. And so the Jupiter is the Wheel of Fortune, which is just called Fortune in the Thoth deck. And so, yeah, that death as Scorpio is like, everybody's like, oh yeah, got that one. And the moon as Pisces, everybody's like, oh yeah, got that one. The chariot is Cancer. And, I think one of the things that resonate the most with people about the chariot is the protective quality of it, just like Cancer, the crab's shell, which is usually considered, Cancers have that hard shell and soft on the inside. They like to feel protected and safe. And so that a lot of times resonates with people regarding the chariot. But I think there's also something very interesting, is that especially not always with the Rider-Waite-Smith, I think, let me try to show where I'm going with this. In the Rider-Waite-Smith image, we have the two sphinxes, the black and the white, and they are facing away from each other a little bit. Theoretically, they're going to pull this chariot, except they're crouched down and sitting. They're not moving. And the whole chariot being stone and everything doesn't look like it has a lot of movement to it. This, of course, changes considerably in a variety of illustrations, and frequently, as is typical with normal chariots, they're being pulled by horses. Now, a lot of times that imagery of the horses kind of facing different directions or pulling different ways ends up following through from the way these sphinxes are represented. And so there's a little bit of this pulling, or maybe the chariot's trying to turn and kind of one horse has started to turn and the other hasn't quite caught up yet. That might be a long way of saying this, but when you think about it, Cancer is the point of the longest day. And so it's when the sun turns, it hits the tropic and turns, and then it goes to Capricorn, and I'm doing my up and down wrong, but it goes to Capricorn and turns again. And so this idea of the chariot card representing the turning of the sun as it reaches its height of success and moves towards a new thing, that is actually a really good interpretation and understanding for the chariot itself. And so I guess I'm in the mood to explain tarot cards today. I'm like, what was the question? Did I answer it? So I'm gonna shut up though. Whatever the question was, I'll come back to it and I'll let Simon talk for a bit. I've had a long day.
No worries. No worries. So let's see some things. Death, of course, very much relates to that transformative power of Scorpio. Also facing fears, facing taboos, and perhaps doing so in a more interested fashion, right? It's, Scorpio is less afraid to face the fear. Okay. So, yes, people look at that card and go, oh, right. But Scorpio isn't looking at it fearfully. Scorpio is looking at that card and going, ooh, right? So that's one thing for us to remember. The moon, it typically relates to a crossroads. It is, of course, Pisces is the end of the zodiac. So that's another turning point, right? The chariot, one of the things about the chariot being, still in this card portrayal in both of these pictures, this version has the knight is holding this kind of vortex of energy, is in this meditational posture, because there is a journey to happen, It hasn't begun yet because there is inner preparation that must be done. If we're doing Cancerian self-protectiveness, then we need to make sure we get our ducks in a row before we start that chariot in motion. Okay. And then, of course, with the Wheel of Fortune, or in this case, Thoth deck just calling it Fortune. Fortune, it should be remembered, is neither inherently good nor bad. Okay. It can be Fortuna Buona or Fortuna Mala. And, as the wheel turns, we're going to see different aspects of life, and we certainly can apply some judgments to that, but that may not be so helpful if we're sticking to one interpretation of what is happening, which actually then goes very well with with the Jupiter rulership of Sagittarius, that wants to broaden our horizons, that wants to look at things from different positions on the wheel in order to be able to get a greater sense of the whole, right? I do find it interesting that Jupiter is in Cancer at this time, and so both the fortune wheel and the chariot emphasize centeredness. And I think that's a real key for us as we're, kind of going back and forth with Mercury retrograde, as we've got this kind of whirlpool of water thing swirling around with all of these deep emotions and intuitions that we may not have really conscious understanding of. Staying centered while all of that is going on. And with the sun moving into Sagittarius, of course, is the beginning of the holiday season for a lot of people. And so now we get that kind of, there's that whirlwind of action going on. Staying centered is going to be really important for us. So that means take time to breathe, take time to meditate, take time to get yourself calm before you face whatever is the next whirligig thing going on.
Do you have anything to add, Joy?
Yeah. So, in what it occurred to me with all of our beginnings and endings, and our death, and our Scorpio underworld energy, and our Piscean energy ending the cycle, Mercury is retrograde in Scorpio right now, but started in its own, as we mentioned, decan in Sagittarius. And Mercury is the god that can travel through the different dimensions. And so that puts a really nice spin on it. And then, so to speak, with the Wheel of Fortune and the energy there on the wheel, we've got Anubis is the red pointy-eared jackal dude that's riding the wheel up, and Anubis is conflated with Mercury, with Hermes, and given the name Hermanubis specifically as a guide through the underworld, and even going back to our Bennu bird, which represents the soul's release and the soul's travels, and so just this idea of traveling through the depth of Scorpio, the evolution that we get at Pisces, and arriving into almost a home, a sense of home and self and protected space with Cancer, and then starting the cycle over. And all of that resonates again at another level for me as I look at that Wheel of Fortune card, because our 4 cherubs that mark the 4 corners, those are the 4 fixed signs, and they are over there in the Thoth chariot as well, scrambled. Their heads and feet are all scrambled. Their feet. because they have things to accomplish. In the Rider-Waite-Smith, they're winged, and that is because they are potential. And the wheel brings potential down into manifestation, just like our art of creation. The wheel is bringing that potential into manifestation, and that's very, I think, relevant to this water trine that's happening now, because we're really all eagerly, like, maybe not everybody, but those of us with Pisces placements are really eagerly awaiting that Neptune and Saturn to get the heck out of Pisces finally and just get onto the dry land of Aries, because all of us were feeling so much better when they were in Aries, and all of my clients are feeling so much crappier now that they're back in Pisces. And so, but the water signs represent the ocean. They represent the gestational energies, which to me is primarily Pisces, but they all can represent that. And so we're really, this grand trine in water is really giving us that dissolution, which is the alchemical phase ruled by Jupiter. They're giving this opportunity for dissolution of the self in order to be reformed as those things move out of water and back into fire. And so just, this is, as frustrating as this is, and I think it's really important that Simon mentioned that shadow work is really, I almost said Saturn work. Shadow work is really important right now. And that's part of that inner work. That's part of that. While I'm here, I might as well spend some time looking within, contemplating, examining my emotions, looking for healing, which is another watery thing. And as the year shifts, as the season shift, as we finally hit that February when everything's back into, not everything, but the things that are holding up those of us with the Pisces placements, as Saturn and Neptune move into Aries in February, that's when we can really restart our new cycle, give birth to ourselves. So, this stuff it's very, you can see how deeply this goes through the tarot symbolism, through the astrology symbolism, through, a variety of other ways of looking at things.
Would you like to add anything else, Simon?
Well, Jupiter and Saturn being in this grand water trine together, we can certainly look at, the hardships and limitations and all that of Saturn, but Saturn also can provide us with our pacing, okay? And our patience and our perseverance, our self-discipline. But in this trine combination with Jupiter, now Jupiter, of course, makes whatever he touches bigger. Okay, so it's big feelings, right? It's not just a little bit of feeling, it's a lot of feeling. But Jupiter also encourages joy, enthusiasm, and if I had to distill everything down to one word, gratitude. And I want to encourage us to, as we're approaching this process, this deep internal process that this grand trine is emphasizing, that when we can allow ourselves some measure of gratitude for our own transformational process, for the things that have happened that are now ending, for the things within us, the experiences we have had that are now drawing to a close, the seasons and cycles that are now drawing to a close. If we can have that gratitude, cultivate that gratitude, we can recognize that we are now preparing for that new beginning. When Saturn and Neptune move into Aries, that's cardinal energy. That's initiatory. That is something starting up. Okay. And so we're now in that space heading into the dark of the year here in the Northern Hemisphere, where it is time to wrap up some things. It is time to let things go. It is time to, to compost some stuff. Okay. And in turn, get ourselves ready in that, that darkness before the dawn, that incubation, that gestational kind of space, dark and watery and internal and introspective, so that when Saturn and Neptune go and hit that big old reset button in the sky, right? That we're ready to start in a way that is, has been lightened of some burdens, perhaps. Okay, and ready to start anew.
That's great. I like that. So now we're going to go to the trapeze. So go ahead, Joy.
So we had another interesting trapezoid shape in this Ingress chart. And I don't remember, the last one we had was a different trapezoid. And it wasn't last month, but I don't remember if it was a month before or further back. But this one is called a trapeze or a cradle. And so I highlighted in darker lines the parts that we're looking at, which is the 3 sextiles moving from Uranus to Neptune to Pluto and then over to the sun at 0 Sag, the opposition from the sun to Uranus, and then of course to kind of double check that all our angles are even, we add the 2 trines, and sure enough we've got the sun trine to Neptune and we've got Uranus trine to Pluto. And and of course, if you don't know what aspect configuration means, of course, you just look at the components that make it up, and so you can figure that out. And so the sextiles are ruled by Venus. They're considered easy aspects, and the Venus energy is a happy, connecting, easygoing energy. I think of the sextile as holding hands. And I actually did a talk on this recently, just actually last week. And so later on, I've got a slide that gives you the link to that. But Venus to me is holding hands. Jupiter is this kind of help from afar. I actually think of throwing a football because you're not like next to each other, but you're connecting deeply with somebody from a distance. And those are the 2 trines that we have. And then the opposition is like this tug of war and pulling different directions. And so then I looked up what does this mean, because I wasn't familiar with it either. And so and what I had said is that basically the trines are easy aspects. The trines and sextiles are easy. Oh no, where am I? I'm trying to stay on track with my bullet points, but I'm on the wrong one. So the trapeze offers energy. So one interpretation that I read was that the trapeze offers energy only from within a context of struggle. And that would be the opposition providing the struggle. And so it's not just about having it easy, like we might find in a grand trine, but that the struggle gives the context for the energy of the trapeze. And so alternately, another interpretation that I read was that it is considered of course, a harmonious configuration because of the easygoing sextile and trine aspects that demands balance, and balance is a good word for that opposition. And then what this site, I think this one was from Cafe Astrology. They had a nice page covering all the different aspect configurations. It said aid from outside. I'm like, that's what I say for trines, help from afar, which appears in the right place at the right time, which interestingly is a little bit of Saturn energy, by the way, but appears in the right place. And there's also the kind of fortuitousness of that Jupiter energy, and for that trine as well. And so I just thought that those were kind of interesting interpretations. And again, another way of thinking about this, of course, is that it is half of a grand sextile, which is the Star of David configuration. It's one half. I think another interpretation I read was that the opposition provided like a place of protection that kind of leads you towards a hidden side, which of course brings up even our Lilith energy as well. But there's kind of an open, easygoing side, and then there's kind of a hidden side that isn't it isn't part of the aspect configuration. So it gives you a few different things to think about. But I think putting the sun in relationship to the three outer planets is a lot of this. I think it's the positivity and the optimism of the Sagittarian energy that opens up a lot of possibility in this grouping here. So do you have any thoughts on that, Simon?
So I've actually been talking about the cradle configuration is what I usually call it, with my Patreon people.
Oh, right. Nice. Good, good.
Okay. And so, this cradle configuration, first of all, an opposition is of the nature of Saturn. Okay. Now, we can certainly think of it as, pulling in opposite directions, but it can also be two planets that effectively, they come from very different places, and now they're in a relationship with each other, trying to integrate each other's messages. And two planets that are opposing each other can see each other most clearly, right? They have awareness of each other and each other's issues. That doesn't mean they know how to integrate those issues yet, but they do have awareness. Okay. And when we think about ourselves gaining awareness of things, it's often a matter of we don't become aware of something until it becomes an issue, right? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Okay. And so, here we've got Sun opposing Uranus, bringing awareness on a Uranus kind of level, which tends to be disruptive, an awareness of a need to change, an awareness of, sudden surprises, sudden disruptions, sometimes of a technological nature. Okay. And then the sextiles and trines, one of the things about these supportive aspects is that unlike the hard aspects really grab our attention. But the trines and sextiles can be so smooth and easygoing that we often neglect their energy, right? We forget to take advantage of the gifts that they are offering. And so there can be this kind of subtlety there. And so I look at that opposition as kind of the lid or the top of the cradle. And then the softer aspects are what are going on behind the scenes under the surface that you could make use of if you so desired, if you are paying attention. Right? And they can give you wonderful support for how to integrate that awareness of the opposition. The other thing that does come to mind is something that Kelly Surtees said a while back regarding the nature of the combination of Venus and Saturn in particular, because we've got so many sextiles. They have that Venusian nature combined with the Saturn nature of the opposition. And she gave the image of, okay, Saturn's like a cranky old man, right? And then you give the cranky old man a baby, and he softens a bit in response to the baby that he's holding. Okay. And I just love that image. It turns Saturn, it turns opposition, it turns like, the limitations and the structure and the strictness of Saturn into a caring grandfather, right? And so I very much want us to consider this configuration from that standpoint of, there are changes and disruptions in our life, right? And that Sun Uranus opposition suddenly brings them into dazzling clarity. But all these other aspects, from these outer planets say that the universe, the zeitgeist, these transcendental planets are all backing you up in addressing that awareness and making the changes that are necessary. And they're backing you up a bit like a grandfather with his granddaughter.
Joy, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I love that. And now I'm always going to call it cradle from now on. and it's of course seasonal too, because it makes me think of a creche. It does look very much like that. And even with the soft aspects, maybe almost a hammock or a swaddling type of energy. And unlike the interpretation I read that said there's kind of a hidden or protected side, I actually feel like once I do see it as a cradle, all of those easygoing aspects are gently supporting from below this ability to literally, you said it's the edge of the cradle, literally open up into the world and into what's beyond the cradle. And that makes so much sense with everything we're talking about with the grand trine in water, with the eventual conjunction in Aries and other things. So yeah, really, really lovely little configuration there. And this also gets activated by different planets throughout the month because of things crossing over that Sagittarian line.
Thank you. So here's the cards that you've laid out. Go ahead, Joy.
Yeah, and so I tried to, sometimes these bigger configurations with more lines are hard to express from the point of view of just a few cards. So I tried to highlight the cards for the planets involved, in which case the Fool is Uranus, and then the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Hanged Man is Neptune, and the World is Saturn. Pluto is Judgment over there in Aquarius. And then at that 0 Sag position, we have the Sun, which thank goodness is the Sun card. It's the one that makes sense out of all of them. Yeah, although one person that I know, one author, makes a really good argument for Jupiter to be the Sun so that none of them make sense. And I actually really like that interpretation. But at any rate, and so then our 3 sextiles are Venus, which is the Empress. The 2 trines are Jupiter, which is the Wheel of Fortune, and the opposition is Saturn, which is the World. And so I made those smaller to represent the aspects themselves. And I think, again, I'm just really seeing our 3 outer planets, plus Saturn, really that gives us the final 4 planets. We can have arguments till we're blue in the face about Pluto, but let's just pretend it's the final 4 planets in the solar system are all right there, being, all kind of staring down that sun, which managed to somehow, when I put them all together, it does really make it look like the odd one out. But just like Simon said, the sun is casting, I forget the beautiful word you use, like glinting or shimmering or something really beautiful light onto the situation. And I definitely see that even more strongly when we add the tarot cards to that. There's a lot of descent and transformation going on with the other cards, and the sun is just so much success and joy and ease and just achievement and happiness. So I think that's my first take on it. What have you got, Simon?
Well, the sun, you're talking about the sun with regard to, its tarot significations. There is a sense of celebration with the sun. And so what stands out to me is that, yes, there's, challenging processes going on in the zeitgeist and underneath the surface of things and all of that. And as we bring our sense of awareness to what is going on, we can do so in a way that celebrates how far have we come despite all of this stuff. Okay. And again, going back to what I said about gratitude, every day above ground is a victory, right? And, how do we mark the sun? We mark the sun day by day, right? The sun defines a day. Okay. And so, I think that also very much goes with the Saturnian nature of the opposition, and also, Saturn being involved with Neptune there. That if we can be approaching these processes that are going on under the surface, these processes that are going on in the world at large, because all of those outer planets, their movements, the aspects that they make, are really more significant on that world astrology level, right? If we can approach all of that with that, okay, what is each day bringing? And then how can I celebrate my progress, approach this situation with discernment, okay? And do so in a way that is recognizing this is setting the stage for things to come. So how do I exercise my sense of purpose, which the sun very much relates to, and my discernment, my awareness to these things in a way that is going to bring insight, which is, interestingly enough, one of the big things about Uranus, represented by that fool. Having beginner's mind and approaching our circumstances with that sense of newness can actually bring powerful insight to us, right? If we assume that we know it all, right? We don't want to look foolish. Well, then we may actually look or behave in a more foolish fashion than if we're willing to be humble, to recognize what we don't know, and approach this with a spirit of learning and enthusiasm, which is one of the things about Sagittarius. Sagittarius is enthusiastic, being ruled by Jupiter. And so this this is really, in my opinion, rather lovely energy for engaging with these larger forces. Okay. Yeah, we live in interesting times, and we can look at that certainly in a fearful manner if we choose to, or we can, embrace each day and say, okay, it's a new day. What do you got for me? Right? And oh, look, I didn't know about this before. Now I'm going to add whatever I'm learning as I am, on this fool's journey that becomes the hero's journey. Okay. I'm going to learn with each day. How can I find ways to integrate these larger energies, to work with them, and to do the deep transformational work of that grand water trine, right? But knowing that I'm being supported by these background processes. That's lovely.
Joy, do you want to share anything more?
No, I think I'm like, I have some things, but I kind of feel like they're going too far afield. And I like what Simon was saying, so I'm going to keep it at that.
Okay. So it's time for our random card draw, and I'll let you both take your cards out and shuffle. And I'm going to take a moment to thank our audience for joining the Astrology Star Sisters while we explore astrology and tarot for the Sagittarius season. And I want to thank both Joy and Madam Simon for joining me today to present to everybody. And we'll just take a moment while they shuffle their cards and pick a card.
And so we're looking at how to use this energy this month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good to me.
So I'm using the Pastoral Tarot, which is by Lisa Hunt, and it is a landscape-oriented tarot deck. The whole deck is like this. And so we've got the Seven of Pentacles, which is definitely that patience. That was one of the keywords Simon gave for Saturn is patience. And this card definitely represents patience. It represents waiting for the harvest, and it can be, and this is one thing that's significant about that Seven of Pentacles. There comes a time when you've done everything you can do, and all you can do is wait and see what happens. And I think that's a lot of, and keep in mind that the Rider-Waite-Smith Seven of Pentacles is very different from the Toth. These are the two cards that are the most difference between the two decks. The Toth Seven of Pentacles is called Failure, but the Seven of Pentacles in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, or in the Golden Dawn tradition, actually is called Success Unfulfilled. I like to call it Success Not Yet Fulfilled. And there is that sense, especially with that Rider-Waite-Smith image of growing a garden, there can be the threat that you get lazy and that you don't tend to the harvest once it does arrive, and you lose things to frost or just things rotting on the vine because you turned your back on it. But there is a sense of, I've done everything I can do. All I have to do now is wait. And I think that is a really difficult place to be a lot of the time. And I think that's a lot of the energy that's going on, especially as we turn within, as we maybe do some shadow work, as we do our meditations. That's why people have trouble meditating, right? Because they're like, I've got a list of things that I need to be doing right now instead of sitting here doing nothing. And yet this is what you need to be doing, is doing nothing while something is working under the surface to come into being. And so I think there's a, Sagittarius season is a it's a stressful season. You can feel that Sag energy as it's dark early and it's colder and everybody is rushing everywhere and spending all of their gold coins on everything, and all of that Jupiterian energy, all of that Sagittarian energy is this time of year. And so making sure you're taking time to know that the harvest is coming, know that things are ripening, know that the work is actually much more below the surface than we might typically see in a Sagittarian energy, and being patient and still paying attention to what might come.
Thank you. That was great. Madam Simon, are you ready?
We have the Fool. So I think that's very interesting, given the the Sun-Uranus opposition we were just discussing. Also, the Fool is the zero space, the empty space before all things. Okay, the willingness to cultivate that beginner's mind that I talked about means emptying ourselves of our preconceptions. Okay, and heading into this season then with that that notion of we're going to allow ourselves to not have preconceptions in order to then see what comes to us. But also, as Joy was talking about, that need to kind of sit there in the busyness, the intensity of the season, right? And take a breath and create some space to open up that space as we are waiting for things to develop. I do think it's also interesting in the sense of that Seven of Wands, where yes, we can see that as success not realized, but also the notion of quote unquote failure. Mistakes are a learning laboratory to see how we can, improve things, do things better, etc. But, it's really about a learning process. And I think that Sagittarius is a broadening of the learning process, the willingness to open ourselves up to a much wider scope of ideas. And when we are looking at big picture stuff, which Jupiter and Sagittarius are more concerned with, those idealistic and philosophical attitudes, sometimes we have to, we kind of have to create some space within us to be able to sit with that and integrate it. Those big picture concepts are not something that we get in this, like that in an instant. And so, there's kind of an interesting little push-pull going on here between the speed of Sagittarius and the Sagittarius season, and also the need to allow ourselves to sit with, the big concepts, the big changes, the stuff going on under the surface, the big world events, all that stuff, and allow ourselves time to let it kind of percolate so that we can eventually grasp it, knowing that we may appear like we don't know it all. It's okay not to know it all just yet. There's a lot to know.
Thank you, Madam Simon, for sharing that. I appreciate that. So, Joy, do you want to share about your slide here, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I do tarot and astrology readings, and my website is joyvernon.com, and that QR code will take you there. And I've got 2 slides because I was greedy. Jupiter was influencing me. And so how to find the story in the astrological chart is a talk that I did on Saturday, and the recording is up on my YouTube channel now. And so you can find Joy Vernon Astrology Tarot Reiki over on YouTube. And again, the QR code will take you straight to the video.
Thank you. That sounds interesting. Madam Simon?
So I write about the transits on Patreon, and I do artwork that goes along with those transits. Typically a single focus transit or set of transits per week. And then I also do custom astrological art for my patrons, depending on the tier there. So if that sounds like something that would be of interest to you, maybe the ability to both see some behind the scenes stuff with regard to the artistic process, but also with regard to how I'm thinking about the transits, feel free to join our community over there. And like Joy and Liz, I am a consulting astrologer and tarot reader. So if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, my website is iconalchemy.com.
And I'm a consulting astrologer. I have a newsletter, and you're watching my YouTube channel, but I appreciate you subscribing and liking. And there's a variety of other shows that the Astrology Star Sisters do. So there's a nice archive, and there's 1 to 3 shows per week coming up. So stop on by. And I will be on Talk Cosmos talking about the Sagittarius new moon at 28 degrees on Sunday, the 14th of December at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And you can watch it here. And I want to thank our sponsor, Astroperegrine, an astrology software for Mac and Windows. And you can find out more information at astroperegrine.com. And I want to thank the both of you for joining me today, and I look forward to having you on next month. And I want to thank our audience. So we're going to say goodbye for now. So goodbye, Simon and Joy.
Bye.